My name is Lydia Hartwell, 32 years old, born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. I design buildings for a living, places meant to last longer than promises. I like clean lines, quiet rooms, and plans that don't collapse halfway through. Maybe that's why this moment feels so wrong. The aisle beside me is empty. The quartet keeps playing, violins trembling through the air as if nothing has gone off key. People rise from the pews, smiling toward the doors, expecting to see my father appear. He doesn't. My bouquet feels heavier than it should white roses, the kind he used to bring home for my birthdays. I keep my smile fixed. Cameras flash. The organist glances at me, unsure whether to stop or keep going. I nod once, as if this was planned. The air inside the old chapel smells of lilies and polished wood, a sweetness that turns sour in my throat. Dad had promised he'd walk me. He'd said the words himself last week, over the phone, steady, certain. But now, only Patricia's whisper echoes in my mind. She's stealing Haley's life. You know that, don't you? My groom waits at the altar, confusion flickering behind his smile. I take a breath that scrapes down my chest and start forward alone. Each step echoes louder than the music. I can feel the guests shift, their eyes sliding from my face to the empty space beside me, trying to make sense of what they see. Halfway down the aisle, I catch a glimpse of him near the back dad, standing still, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the floor. Patricia's hand clings to his arm. For a heartbeat, I think he'll move. He doesn't. When I reach the end, I pass the bouquet to my maid of honor and force myself to breathe. My phone, hidden in the seam of my dress, vibrates once. A message lights the screen. Dad, we need to talk. The ceremony continues, but the room blurs. My throat tightens with something sharp and unfinished. Later, when the music fades and the guests leave, that message will still glow against the dark proof that what broke today didn't begin here. It began years ago, the day Patricia moved into our house. My name is Lydia Hartwell, 16 then, still clinging to the kind of faith only daughters have that their fathers will never change. It was the summer after sophomore year, the air thick with Charleston heat and the sound of cicadas that made everything feel slower, heavier. Dad met Patricia at a real estate gala downtown. I remember him coming home later than usual, smelling of champagne and cedar cologne, a brightness in his voice that hadn't been there in years. He said her name like it tasted expensive. By August, she was everywhere, her laugh in our kitchen, her perfume on the guest towels, her picture in the frame that used to hold Mom's. She brought her daughter, Haley, with her 15, all soft curls and quiet smiles. Patricia called her my little angel every chance she got. At first, I tried to be polite. I offered to help unpack boxes, set the table, stay out of the way. Patricia thanked me in that sweet, practiced tone people use when they don't plan to remember your name. Within weeks, our house no longer sounded like us. Classical music replaced Dad's old vinyls. The blue curtains Mom sewed disappeared overnight, replaced with ivory ones that lightened the space. When Patricia spoke, Dad listened. When I spoke, she smiled for both of us. One night, I passed the living room and saw her hand resting lightly on his arm as she laughed at something small, something ordinary, and just like that, I knew our home wasn't ours anymore. That was the first night I stayed awake till dawn, sketching houses that couldn't be taken apart. The changes came slowly at first, like water rising under a door. Patricia never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her control came through tone, timing, and an uncanny ability to make every suggestion sound like kindness. She called them little improvements, my posture, my diction, the way I laughed too loudly when I got nervous. Haley's such a delicate spirit, she'd say over dinner, cutting her salmon into perfect bites. She brings out the best in people, don't you think? Lydia Dad would nod without looking up, the corner of his mouth tightening in quiet agreement. I started spending more time in my room, sketching floor plans I didn't understand yet, lines and angles that gave shape to the order missing downstairs. Sometimes Haley would peek in, holding her phone, her voice soft and hesitant. "Mom's in one of her moods," she'd whisper. "Maybe stay up here for a while." I never blamed her. She was kind even when she didn't have to be. Maybe that was why it hurt more to watch her fit so easily into the space I used to fill. One night, I came home from choir practice to hear my name echoing from the study. I stopped outside the door, pulse jumping. "She's just jealous," Patricia said. "You give her too much freedom, and she's using it to compete with Haley. It's not healthy." Dad's voice was low, unsure. "She's my daughter, Patricia." "Exactly," she snapped, the word sharp enough to cut through the wall. "And she's using that to manipulate you." The silence that followed stretched until it snapped. I waited for him to defend me, to say something, anything. He didn't. When the footsteps moved toward the door, I slipped upstairs before they saw me. That night, he didn't knock on my door like he used to. After that, the pattern was set. Patricia spoke. Dad listened. I tried to argue, but it only made me sound angry, ungrateful. She would tilt her head, sigh, and tell me she understood that I needed attention. Every word chipped away at something I couldn't name. By the time winter came, the house no longer felt like home, but a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. Patricia's laughter filled the rooms. Haley's music drifted through the walls. And my father, once the center of every memory I loved, had become another piece of furniture she'd rearranged. By the time graduation came, Dad had missed enough milestones that I stopped expecting him to show up. When the ceremony ended and the crowd began to scatter, I stood alone beneath the bleachers, holding my diploma like a secret. My classmates posed for photos, their parents calling out their names. I told everyone mine was running late, but I knew better. That night, the house was filled with laughter. Patricia and her friends toasted Haley's piano recital, their voices rising above the clinking of glasses. No one mentioned my diploma. I went upstairs, changed into jeans, and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the driveway. The longer I stayed, the smaller I felt. A week later, I packed for college. Patricia hovered in the doorway of my room, her perfume thick in the air. "Good luck." "Lydia," she said, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Don't forget where you came from." Her tone made it sound like a warning. Dad helped carry my suitcase to the car but didn't say much. His eyes looked tired, softer than I remembered. When he hugged me goodbye, it felt formal, like two people rehearsing affection. I told myself not to cry. That night, unpacking in my dorm room, I found a small velvet box tucked between my clothes. Inside was my mother's locket, the one Patricia once called tacky. A folded note lay beneath it, written in Dad's careful handwriting. "Your mom would be proud. Don't let anyone dim that light." I held it against my chest, the metal cool against my skin. For the first time in years, I let myself believe he still remembered who I was. College felt like learning to breathe underwater. Everything was loud, fast, unfamiliar. My roommate called home every night. I learned to keep my phone face down. Dad texted once during orientation, "Hope you're settling in," and then silence stretched like a wall I didn't know how to climb. I worked at a small diner near campus, pouring coffee for people who never looked up. The shifts were long, the tips thin, but I liked the rhythm of it, the sizzle of the grill, the hum of conversation. It was a kind of noise that didn't demand anything from me. When I got back to the dorm after midnight, I'd sketch until my hands cramped. Houses, staircases, windows that opened toward imagined light. Building became the only way I knew how to stay standing. Money ran out halfway through the semester. I learned which stores threw away bread that was still good, how to stretch a bag of rice for a week when the loneliness pressed too hard. I'd hold my mother's locket and whisper her words, the ones Dad had written down. "Don't let anyone dim that light." It became a mantra, a shield. On weekends, I'd wander through the architecture department's open studios. I wasn't enrolled in their program yet, but the smell of graphite and paper felt like belonging. One professor noticed me lingering and asked to see my sketches. He didn't say much, only nodded and handed me a brochure. Apply next term. I took it home and taped it above my desk. The night I received my acceptance letter, I sat alone on the dorm floor with a cup of instant coffee and the letter trembling in my hands. For the first time, I didn't wish Dad could see it. The ache was still there, but it had changed shape, less a wound. More a scar I could finally live with. I placed the locket beside the letter and whispered into the quiet room. When no one stands beside you, stand taller. Then I turned off the light and let the darkness feel like peace instead of punishment. My second year in the architecture program felt like stepping into a language I'd always known but never spoken out loud. Lines, balance, light, each one made sense in a way people hadn't for years. Still, I kept to myself, careful not to take up too much space. That changed the day Eleanor Pierce walked into our studio. She was a guest lecturer, a retired architect whose name I'd seen in journals stacked in the library. Silver hair, bright scarves, voice like warm thunder. When she spoke, the room stopped fidgeting. She studied our projects, asking quiet questions that felt like challenges disguised as kindness. When she reached my desk, she ran a finger along the edge of my blueprint and smiled. You see the bones before the walls. That's rare. I didn't know how to respond. Compliments usually came with conditions. Hers didn't. After class, she asked me to walk with her to the cafe across the quad. She ordered black coffee. No sugar. You've got an eye for truth. Lydia, she said, but truth needs belief to stand up. You have to trust your own lines. She became my anchor that year. We met on Friday mornings, sometimes just to talk about structure, sometimes about silence, and how it shapes what we build. She told stories about being the only woman in the room back in the 80s, about learning to let skepticism sharpen her instead of shrink her. Under her guidance, my work changed, so did I. I started designing spaces that felt like resilience, open, balanced, steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply creating something that could hold. By the time I turned 28, I was living in New York, working for a small design firm that specialized in restoring old brownstones. The hours were brutal, but I loved the quiet satisfaction of bringing something forgotten back to life. Every cracked wall, every leaning beam felt like proof that beauty could return after neglect. I understood that kind of survival. When Eleanor retired, she sent me a note that said, "You've got the hands of a builder and the heart of a storm. Don't let the world tame either one." I kept it pinned above my drafting table. It reminded me that grace could live beside grit. 2 years later, I took the risk that changed everything. I left the firm and opened my own studio, Hartwell Designs, in a rented room above a bakery in Brooklyn. The walls smelled faintly of cinnamon and sawdust. My first projects were small apartment renovations, storefront facades, sketches for clients who paid late but believed in the work. I learned how to balance ledgers and blueprints in the same breath. When deadlines loomed, I'd stay up until dawn, tracing plans by lamplight while delivery trucks rumbled outside. I didn't mind the solitude. It was a clean kind of loneliness. No one could take credit for my progress but me. Slowly, the projects grew. A nonprofit hired me to redesign a community center. Then came a commission for a heritage restoration in Savannah, each success stitched over something that had once been torn. Eleanor visited once during construction. She stood beside me on the site, hands in her coat pockets, watching the sunlight hit the scaffolding. "You rebuild with memory," she said softly. "That's your gift." When the ribbon was finally cut, I didn't invite my father. I didn't need him to see it. I already knew what pride felt like. It was the steadiness in my own hands. By 31, Hartwell Designs had grown into a small team, women who worked hard, laughed often, and didn't apologize for taking up space. Some nights, I'd linger at the office long after they'd gone, leaning against the window and looking out over the city lights. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the girl who used to wait for permission. It was someone who had built her own name from the ground up and made sure it would stand. It was a Sunday afternoon when the message arrived. I was reviewing plans for a townhouse renovation, a mug of cold coffee beside my sketch pad, when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved but still recognized. "Haley's getting married. She'd love for you to come." It was from Dad. No greeting, no question, just a simple sentence that felt heavier than it should. For a long time, I stared at it, waiting for something else to appear. Maybe an apology, or even a mistake that it was meant for someone else. But the screen stayed still. After more than a decade of silence, this was all he had to say. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, the city moving beneath me like a current I no longer fought. I tried to imagine Haley in a white dress, Patricia hovering nearby, making sure every detail looked perfect. I wondered if they'd ever spoken about me, if my name still lingered in their house like dust they never quite swept away. I opened my laptop and looked at my calendar. I had deadlines stacked for weeks, projects that could easily justify saying no, but I typed a single note beside the wedding date anyway, Charleston. Not as a reunion, not even as forgiveness, just a return. When the train ticket confirmation hit my inbox later that night, I realized my hands were trembling. I wasn't sure if it was anger or something that felt dangerously close to hope. Charleston looked smaller than I remembered, but the air still carried that same mix of salt and magnolia. The church stood on the corner of Meeting Street, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows that once colored my childhood. I arrived early, sat in the last pew, and tried to steady my breathing. Patricia spotted me first. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind women wear when they realize their plans haven't worked entirely. "Lydia," she said, her voice syrupy. "You came." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." Haley approached then, radiant in lace and soft curls. She hugged me without hesitation. Her warmth disarmed me, and for a moment I saw the sister we could have been. Then I saw Dad. His hair had thinned, his shoulders curved with age, but his expression was careful, neutral, like someone afraid to say the wrong thing. "You look different," he said quietly. "Time does that." I smiled. We spoke about travel, weather, anything that avoided the years between us. When Patricia linked her arm through his, the familiar distance returned, neat and practiced. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and music. It was at the reception, under crystal chandeliers and polite laughter, that the air began to change. Patricia took the microphone for her toast. "Family," she began, her tone polished, "isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, devotion, and love." Her eyes flicked to me as she said it. Some people understand that better than others. The applause was soft, hesitant. I set down my glass and rose. "Beautiful words," I said, smiling. "And true. Though I'd add something sometimes family is also about forgiveness." The room went still. Even the violinist stopped mid-note. I didn't plan to speak. I continued. "But since we're celebrating loyalty, I should share some news. Most of you don't know me well. My name is Lydia Hartwell, founder of Hartwell Designs. My firm just finished renovating the venue we're standing in." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw recognition flicker across faces. Someone whispered, "This place." "She built this," Dad blinked, startled. "You did this?" "Yes," I said softly. "Every beam, every window. We reopened last spring." Patricia's smile faltered. "Well," she said, laughter tight, "what a coincidence." "Not entirely," I replied. "I like restoring places with history, places worth saving." Her hand tightened around her glass. The silence that followed was heavy, almost tender in its honesty. Dad's expression shifted something between pride and grief. I felt it too. For the first time, he was seeing me without Patricia's reflection in the frame. I didn't stay much longer. The music resumed, and people began to talk again, softer now. As I walked toward the terrace doors, Dad reached out, his fingers brushing mine. His voice was unsteady. "I had no idea," he whispered. "I know." I said, "You weren't supposed to." Outside, the night was warm, the sky bruised with fading light. From inside, I could still hear the laughter, but it no longer stung. The building stood solid around me mine, and finally, so was I, a week after the wedding. I met Dad at a small cafe near the harbor. The air smelled of salt and espresso, and the morning light settled gently on the table between us. He looked older than I remembered. The kind of tired that came from years of pretending peace was the same as love. "I didn't know how much you'd done," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. "I'm proud of you, Lydia." I nodded. The words didn't hurt anymore. They simply arrived too late to sting. "You don't need to make up for anything," I said. "Just be honest." He swallowed, eyes glistening. "I chose quiet when I should have chosen you." "Patricia, she made it easy to look away." "She didn't make you," I said softly. "You let her." He looked down, shame tightening his jaw. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't cruel this time, it just existed, simple and human. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, the same one that once held my mother's locket. Inside was a folded note. In his uneven handwriting, it read, "For your next design. Maybe a home with room for both of us." I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb. There was no grand apology, no promise of perfect repair, just an opening, a place to begin again. When we parted, I walked along the waterfront, the sunlight flashing against the water like a slow heartbeat. I touched the locket at my neck and felt its weight settle not as memory, but as balance. The aisle had been empty once, but standing here, wind in my hair, I realized I had walked it all the way through, and I was still standing.